There were some questions around sleep and melatonin and light, and figuring out ways to perpetually navigate honoring our circadian rhythms with light on our eyes. There's also questions around sweating and detoxification, and then allowing ourselves to have those big moments of like catharsis and then celebration and assimilation and reintegration, right? So often we're perpetually moving the goalposts. Like celebrate the wins, celebrate the financial wins, celebrate the emotional um, catharsis, celebrate the breakthrough in the relationship. And then how many of us the next day are like, okay, what's next? Versus allowing for that pause and integration. I think that that example shows up in every area of life. Okay, we're gonna eat some food, we're gonna digest it, we're gonna absorb it and assimilate, and then we also detoxify and eliminate that which doesn't serve us. And if all we're doing is consuming, 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 well, now we've got obesity in regard to our relationships, in regard to weight loss, in regard to physical activity and muscle growth and strength, all of that. There is a plateau that I see as a really good thing to be able to be in that pause of the plateau. And sometimes it's uncomfortable, because we're like, no, I'm accustomed to growing, growing, growing. I want my business to double every year. Why am I not growing? And I go, well, sometimes we get to take that pause, allow the plateau, and continue to celebrate while it assimilates and our new quote unquote normal, our new baseline is shifted. Think about upper limiting. The thermostat has been set to a new temperature. We have our new normal. And then we allow that pause to integrate it into this is safe, right? Change is the biggest threat to our safety. So when we've had a big change, I think it's really important that we allow that pause to assimilate it so that that change feels safe at the conscious and the unconscious level. And then, even though it's uncomfortable because we're such type A, like, go, let's do the next thing, we get to go, okay, now what's next? And I think in that process, the upper limiting and the self sabotage is much less likely to take place. Remembering that this is in our love relationships and our sense of belonging, in feeling enough, in financial growth, business growth, hiring, our nutrition, our weight, our strength, all of it. This is kind of fun and this is super intellectual, but I listened to this great webinar that was put on by the Dutch company. And it was just so thought provoking. And so you might want to take some notes. It's a little bit heady. I just kind of did a brain dump. So my notes aren't super refined yet, but I just loved the content so much. I was like, oh my gosh, I have to take notes here. And I think it'd be fun to relay for a group call. This is really around both sleep and reduction in inflammation, right? So Diagnostic Solutions is the company that owns the Dutch test. And they brought in Dr. Deanna Minich, who she's a PhD and a master's in science. And the topic of the talk was, is melatonin the next vitamin D? And so everything that we've learned about vitamin D as a hormone, as a source of mood stabilization, immune system support, bone health, hormonal well-being, there's some suggestion that melatonin might end up being that next thing that we become really excited about. Regarding the value of sleep, in my podcast, I did a 3-part series. So that was episode 55, 56, and 57. I'm going to say it's always worth going back and reminding ourselves of like all of the value that quality sleep offers in regard to detoxification, integration of our memories, weight management, energy level, brain fog. I mean, I could go on and on. And so melatonin is a hormone, okay? And it's available over the counter. And there's some controversy within the medical world, like, should this still be over the counter? Or should it be something that someone has to get a prescription for? Because it is very easy for some individuals to dose too much melatonin. So the objective is that we can fall asleep quickly, stay asleep, right? Properly detoxify while we sleep and have enough energy through the day. And so the history of melatonin, it was actually developed by this gentleman, Dr. Lemur, who was a Yale dermatologist. And he was doing research. They were trying to find skin whitening products. And so they were researching tadpoles. And these tadpoles, given melatonin, their skin became whiter. So that's where the name melatonin came from. Mela meaning skin, and tonin because they were linking it to serotonin. And so when Josie asked the question yesterday on the Q&A around serotonin levels, serotonin and melatonin have this really direct relationship. And so most of our melatonin comes from the pineal gland. And what's fascinating is it's used in plants as a growth factor. So in agriculture, they will give plants melatonin to produce more phytochemicals and also actually help the plants better detoxify. They've also found a direct link with melatonin and dementia, similar to that of vitamin D. So they're linking it to cognitive work. And there's a lot of research on the rise with melatonin and vitamin D both in regard to Alzheimer's, dementia, that kind of thing. So melatonin is in all tissues. It's found in our fluids. It's found in our brain. It's found in our skin, our liver, our thyroid, okay? And it's actually quite high in the mitochondria. Okay, so once again, the mitochondria is in every cell as like the source of energy generation. And so melatonin is pretty prolific. It's also found in breast milk and it's found in urine, which is one of the reasons why when we look at your Dutch Plus test, we can see your melatonin levels in a Dutch Plus. Okay. So hormones need receptors, and melatonin receptors are at the cell membrane. And there's two main organs that are going to be the main source of both production of melatonin and where the receptors are the strongest. One being the pineal gland, and that's the place that you hear of talked about most often. The second is actually the gut. And the gut makes 400 times more melatonin than the pineal gland. So melatonin has been found to link to cortisol secretion, blood sugar management, blood pressure, our sleep, and our waking cycles, right? And so sleep and waking is what we think of most commonly with melatonin, but they're now finding it's associated with so many different things, right? So low melatonin is associated with sleep disturbances, migraines, aging, dementia, pain, fibromyalgia, insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes, Parkinson's, PCOS, rheumatoid arthritis, Alzheimer's, just to name a few. So they're linking all of this to melatonin. So it works as a hormone, but specifically through the eyes. So this goes back to these conversations that I'm having where first thing in the morning, we want our eyes to have exposure to light. Just simply sit near a window, open up the window, get some fresh air, get some light on your eyes, okay? So we're wanting that light to go through the retina where it's receiving light. The retina is also getting the memos when it's receiving darkness, okay? So getting into kind of like the science of the eyes, we have rods and cones. So rods are what bring in black and white, cones are what bring in color. And so there's this intrinsic, this thing called the photosensitive retinal ganglion cells that are in the retina. And they're enriched with signaling and receiving blue light in the environment, okay? So we don't want excess blue light in the evening time, which is why I say we talked a lot about the idea of limiting our eyes' exposure to lux and specifically blue light. So anything that's coming from screens, your phones, your iPads, your Kindles, your TVs, even LED lights. We're wanting to really dim that. When we're exposed to blue light, our endogenous production of melatonin is suppressed. Okay, so in the morning, the sunlight that comes in, like if you ever notice sun rises, the sky has more hues of purples and blues. Sunsets have more hues of reds and oranges. If you're ever looking at a painting, you can tell if there's sunrise, sunset. And so that is the normal way that nature's intended to. The sun is coming up, it's blue light heavy. It's the memo through our pineal gland, through our retina, through our eyes to turn melatonin off, turn cortisol on, so we wake up for the day, okay? And I think it's important to highlight that the eyes being a main conversation here, meaning what the eyes are exposed to, and if someone is blind, if someone has cataracts, if they have macular degeneration, um, all of that is going to translate to melatonin issues if there's actual challenges with the eyes and how they're receiving light. And then too much blue light exposure can have a really big effect. Okay. So we're talking about the circadian clock and the timing of hormones. And the more that they're studying this, we're realizing like we can look at your 24-hour cortisol curve. Our cortisol curve is related to our exposure to sunlight. Okay. There's something called clock genes. Um, and what's fascinating in this webinar is they were talking about dawn and dusk being the times where they consider a transcription rush hour. So it's when our clock genes are the most active. Okay. And they were saying that not everyone is on a 24-hour cycle. So we assume circadian means 24 hours, but they were saying some people are innately on a 28-hour day. And that we get to personalize and honor this approach, which I think is really fascinating. But the big thing being dawn and dusk is when these clock genes are like in that transcription rush hour. And so to really honor what light we're allowing into our eyes at dawn and dusk, I also think it's really fascinating. Babies tend to have like the colic hour is usually at dusk. And, my husband working in long-term care facilities, there would be a wing for the Alzheimer's unit, and they call it the witching hour. So there's something that I've always, for the last 15 years, I've been very curious about to go, what is shifting at that dawn and dusk time? Is it that there's pressure in the atmosphere that's changing? Is it the light that's changing where they expect it on an Alzheimer's unit where they have this witching hour specifically at dusk. And I think it might link back to something with these clock genes where there's all this transcription happening. And keep in mind that the liver is that hub of phase 1 of the detoxification. So there's also highest level of circadian genes in the liver, and specifically in that 2 to 4 hour time period. What if the reason you wake up exhausted even after a full night's sleep has nothing to do with your age, your schedule, your willpower? I'm Maraya Brown, a certified nurse midwife and vitality strategist. And after 2 decades supporting high-achieving women around the world, I've discovered what's really draining your energy and why most doctors miss it entirely. If you've been battling brain fog, bloating, weight that won't budge, or that nagging sense that something just feels off, you need to watch this. I created a short, powerful video that walks you through the hidden hormone chaos behind burnout and exactly how my clients turn things around in just 90 days. So click the link in the show notes to watch. It's completely free, and it might be the most important 10 minutes you spend on yourself this year. Again, click the link in the show notes, and I'll see you there. So if you're one of those individuals that's having a waking spout in that 2 to 4 a.m., I'm thinking adrenals, I'm thinking blood sugars, I'm also thinking liver. I don't know if anybody's ever followed Dr. Bill Sears. He's got like 35 best-selling books. He's a pediatrician. He and his wife were friends of ours when we lived in Hawaii because they'd always come to the Big Island and stay at the Four Seasons. And they've published so many books around, becoming parents, new mother, the baby book for that first year, breastfeeding. And I remember having conversations with her. It's like there's something going on here at specifically dawn and dusk, but most profoundly dusk, where the colic hour is the most pronounced, the witching hour is most pronounced. And I'm curious to see if we end up finding out that it's this clock genes, that once again, transcription at rush hour time. So as a reminder, our eyes are exposed to light, melatonin goes off, cortisol and testosterone turn on. They're also suggesting that our thyroid hormones actually start peaking between that 1:30 and 3:30 a.m. time. So right now, for individuals who have sluggish thyroid or hypothyroidism and are on levothyroxine, they are to take their thyroid medication first thing in the morning on an empty stomach. I don't think anyone is gonna suggest that we wake up to take our thyroid meds, but it is interesting that they're finding in a normal circadian rhythm for an individual who has really healthy thyroid levels, that's when the peak of thyroid hormone production is happening in that 1:30 to 3:30 a.m. time. And so then I'm just curious for someone who has hyperthyroidism, if they're waking up during that time, is it the liver? Is it the adrenals? Is it the blood sugars? Could it be that in that scenario, the thyroid is already hyperactive, and so it's overproducing thyroid hormone at that time? And so then once again, the more we can start paying attention to this circadian rhythm, our eyes' exposure to light and acknowledging how much it's impacting our melatonin, our serotonin, and our thyroid hormone is just a fascinating thing to think of, right? So talking about gut health specifically, melatonin is made in the body, okay? But not in the pineal gland only. Like, I had always thought of melatonin, pineal gland, melatonin, pineal gland. But what happens in the gut is that, like I said, 400 times more melatonin is produced in the gut, but it's different because she was saying is that the melatonin that's produced in the gut stays in the gut. She says, what happens in the gut stays in the gut. Okay. Whereas the pineal gland melatonin has a systemic effect. So the pineal gland melatonin is going to impact our brain, as an example, our sleep, as an example. But for the gut, they're linking it to intestinal mobility, gastrointestinal secretions, microbiome modulation research is showing to be promising. Okay, so what comes first, the chicken or the egg? If we start supplementing with the right dosing of melatonin, is it then having a positive impact on our gut lining? And as we're supporting our gut microbiome, is that then supporting better secretion of melatonin from the gut, knowing that the melatonin that's produced in the gut stays in the gut? She also talked a good amount about short chain fatty acids, right? And the fiber being an essential piece. Okay, so our quality fats and our quality fiber are going to stimulate serotonin secretion, which enhances melatonin production. And oh, by the way, helps us feel happy and more connected. So she really hit home on fiber, 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 right? We want to be eating lots of fruits, lots of vegetables. You know that I'm always telling everybody ground flax, organic ground flax every day, right? Finding perpetual ways to increase the fiber in our bodies, staying away from the foods that are white, yellow, and brown. Yeah. But really looking for fiber rich things to add in. She's talked about babies. So she says, ironically, babies don't produce much melatonin until they're 1. And it's the highest in a child between the age of 1 and puberty. Okay, but babies are receiving melatonin through breast milk. Okay, so once again, the big plug in there for if you're gonna give birth, or you know someone who is, to advocate for breastfeeding rather than what's formula. Okay, and so then for women, when they're pregnant and breastfeeding, to supplement with melatonin, they're finding that it can actually positively impact the microbiome of the child. And then what happens is after puberty, our melatonin level naturally starts to drop, and it tends to hit rock bottom around age 50. And so right around age 50, now we're at like our lowest of intrinsic melatonin production. And so she's suggesting that it might make sense for individuals at that 50-year and beyond to start supplementing with melatonin. But if you're going to supplement with melatonin, you really want to start small. Like, start at the smallest dose and then slowly work your way up. She talks about this circadian rhythm, that there's a pulse pattern. Okay, so when the lights dim, it means more production of melatonin, right? And then as the lights come up, it goes down. But ironically, melatonin peaks in that 2 to 4 a.m. time. So I'm like, wow, This 2 to 4 a.m. time, there's so much going on there. The liver is at its peak, the thyroid's at its peak, melatonin is at its peak. Um, and she really hit home that she thinks the majority of industrialized nations have darkness deficiency. She says darkness deficiency is a real thing that most humans are suffering from. Okay, we have electronic lighting. She says there's light pollution, and that light pollution should actually be considered an endocrine disruptor. So I talk a lot about endocrine disruptors from the perspective of plastics and our makeup and our cleaning products and our laundry detergents, right? So light pollution is also an endocrine disruptor. Okay, so of course we want to continue to take plastics out of the house and parabens out, but also start really paying attention to the light pollution that our eyes are being exposed to. So once again, phone late at night, consider that an endocrine disruptor. Your Kindle late at night, television, computer, LED lights, those can all be considered endocrine disruptors. And to allow a lot of light during the day, but really be aware of the overstimulation at night. Okay. So she's talked about LED bulbs can have been proven. Research has shown that an LED bulb can reduce melatonin as much as 50 to 80%. So an LED bulb might be energy saving, but it's also sleep disturbing, which is also affecting our hormones and our thyroid. So light is measured in what's called a lux. So one candle from 3 feet away is considered 1 lux. It has a negligible effect on melatonin and sleep, but 1 lux through LED light has a definite impact on our melatonin and our sleep. So we want less than 1 lux in our sleeping space, okay? If someone absolutely has to have a nightlight, she says a max of 10 lux. Okay. She talked about something as simple as in your office, like right now, my desk, I'm facing windows. So I'm getting natural light. My marketing team is always saying, you need to bring in better lighting, get your big, your ring light and all that stuff. It's going to look better on camera. I'm like, I know, but I don't want those fake lights on my eyes. So can you adjust where you work to do something as simple as face a window versus face a wall? Right? To look at how are we exposing our eyes to the natural light, blue light first half of the day, red light second half of the day, right? Getting outside during daylight time. Okay, can you just simply sit near a window, open the window and gaze outside? Allow your eyes to be exposed to light. Okay. Within 3 hours before bed, we really want to minimize blue light exposure. Okay. We're looking for even adding in a warmer reddish hue bulbs. Okay. Staying off of the phones, the computers, the TV, so that we can detoxify the light pollution as an endocrine disruptor. Okay. She specified that even our eye color can have a different effect, right? So light colored eyes, like someone who's blue eyed or green eyed, they're more susceptible to the suppressive effects of blue light, suppression of melatonin. Whereas if you have brown eyes or dark eyes, you have like a little bit of a get out of jail free card, a little bit here. But someone like me with blue eyes, I have to be more aware of light reduction and to put the filter on the computer, to dim the lights, when I can. I don't use a whole lot of candlelight right now because I have young children, and I'm slightly paranoid about fires since I had to drive through the fire, but, like, perpetually figuring out how can I turn off the lights, okay? And also, by the way, light-colored eye individuals, are less sensitive to seasonal affective disorder. All right. So there's some advantages to having light colored eyes. We talk a lot about menopause as a thing that we're all aware of. But now science is talking about adrenopause, meaning the adrenals. And she says there's actually going to be melatonin pause. And so she highlighted that vitamin D is connected to the sun and melatonin as the counterpart to vitamin D. So we really want to make sure that we're getting adequate darkness and adequate light. And, most of us are vitamin D deficient. So we're always, I'm always ordering vitamin D levels. We're measuring them and then adding in. So for melatonin, to start supplementing, and once again, start as small as possible. I was playing around with a little bit, and even I found the lowest dose at the local natural food store, and I fell asleep quickly, but I was noticing the next day when I was waking up, I was feeling groggy, and I was having a hard time waking up. It's like, "No, no, no, okay, that's too much for me." So I was taking the lowest dose and cutting it into fourths. And so she talks about, the melatonin ultimate multitasker. So once again, it helps with sleep. It's an antioxidant, that is both fat and water soluble, which is super fascinating. It's metabolized through the liver and actually acts as an antioxidant in the body. So it's actually gonna go out and scavenge free radicals. They're saying possibly even more than vitamin C, and vitamin C is only water soluble. So she says it's more effective than vitamin E. She's suggesting it's even more effective than glutathione, and it likes both fat and water. Once again, water soluble and fat soluble. It's found in blood, but also crosses the blood-brain barrier, and it can lead to the production of other antioxidants. Glutathione as an example, okay? So we're just like, I think it's really fun to do this deep dive into, melatonin has all of these different factors and benefits in the long run. There were also some references specifically to C19 and long haul, and what's fascinating is most of the protocols that I've been following for C19 specifically all include melatonin. And there's both synthetic and plant-derived options. The plant-derived options that this woman was suggesting specifically, I'm in communication with the company. She says it's neuroprotective, so they're actually linking melatonin to nerve growth factor emerging literature, meaning for those with neurovascular or nervous system challenges, that melatonin might be supportive there and then also protective for the brain. If we're talking about food sources, all of the phytonutrients, so specifically seeds, nuts, fruits, um, but most of them aren't gonna be enough. So particularly during our, beyond age 40 or so, she's really saying that we're looking for replenishment. We just simply can't get enough through food is what she's suggesting. So focusing on our light health, so reduction of light as a toxin and allowing darkness to be part of our world, and then also actually supplementing with melatonin. There's this relationship between so tryptophan turns to serotonin and serotonin turns to melatonin, but there's lots of steps in the midst of that. They require what's called nutrient cofactors. And so, tryptophan-rich foods, your turkey, your salmon, potentially for some, you can play around with, do I supplement with tryptophan during the day? And do I supplement with melatonin at night? And there's a lot of gummies out there. I'm not a fan of the gummies. I think the gummies are an excuse to get in more sugar. And, especially at night, now we're going back into this blood sugar dysregulation thing, so just getting them in you can get them little tiny capsules or even tablets. I like the tablets that dissolve underneath the tongue because then once again, I can break them, and just start as low as possible. You don't wanna feel groggy the next day, so if you try for, like, 5 nights and pay attention to how am I feeling. We can always look at your Dutch Plus test and see what your melatonin showed at least at that point, but starting as low as like a zero 0.3 milligram. And the other thing is when we're looking at supplemental melatonin, some of it is derived from actual pineal glands, predominantly from pigs, versus plant-derived melatonin. And she said 99% of the melatonin on the marketplace is synthetically made. It may come from corn or soy. And are there contaminants? And so that's why I'm in communication with this company specifically. They really tout that it's plant-derived and it's contaminant-free, and so stay tuned. I'm kinda doing my own research there. And so she'll say some people were like, "Oh, no, I've tried melatonin in the past. I had a really negative effect." And she goes, "Well, is it that it was a negative effect to the melatonin, or was it that the melatonin that you supplemented with was chemically derived, and the side effect was actually from that?" She says the best plant-based melatonins are, they're coming from green plant material like rice, alfalfa, chlorella, and so it's phytomelatonin, and they're saying that that outperforms in all scenarios, so greater anti-inflammatory property, greater free radical scavenging, plant melatonin may be the preference, and so, and then once again, it can be measured in your urine. Hopefully this was helpful. It was a fun deep dive for me. Bye, you guys.